Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois is co-spokesperson for Quebec Solidaire, and if his party were to win the next election coming up, we're just 6 months away from the next provincial election. If his party were to win, he would become Premier of Quebec. And it is our pleasure to welcome back Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois onto the program. Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First things first, let's talk about CHSLD Herron, the Herron, and you had some strong words for this government and the Premier this morning. I'm reading La Presse Canadienne, their story on this. You're talking about cowardice this morning when it comes to the Premier and his government. Tell me what you think.
Well, we have to remember, Mr. Legault is governing Quebec with the state of emergency for 2 years now. Mr. Legault has all powers. And he cannot take credit for what goes well and then blame others when things go wrong. Either he is responsible for the Quebec dealing of the pandemic or he's not. But he cannot only take credit for the success and blame the failures on others. That's what we are seeing from Mr. Legault in the last days, and that is, yes, a lack of courage. It's a lack of leadership. He should assume his responsibilities for everything that happened during that first wave, not only the successes, but also the problems.
What would be an appropriate way for him to assume those responsibilities? Would you like to see something like resignations for Ministre Blais, Ministre McCann?
The way to be up to his responsibilities is to put a public and transparent inquiry in place on the dealing of Quebec during the pandemic. We need to shed light on what happened in the CHSLD Herron. We need to shed light about what happened in a lot of places in Quebec and a lot of CHSLDs during the first wave of the pandemic. Those families deserve answers, and the best way to give them answers is a full, complete, and transparent public inquiry on the pandemic in Quebec.
What were your thoughts when you listened to the recordings of those phone calls to InfoSanté to 811 from the owners of the Herron?
It's unbelievable. Quebec is a rich society. It's unbelievable that owners of an establishment like that have to call a public emergency line to get staff to take care of elderly people in Quebec. It's unbelievable. We should not see things like that in a society as rich as Quebec society. And we need answers. We need to understand why our system failed that much, how the Quebec state failed the elderly people that were in those places, in those beds, in those establishments. And the only way to have all the answers, the only way to give a little bit of peace to the families of the deceased people is to have that public and transparent inquiry.
I've seen you speaking quite a bit about healthcare in the last week, and you're promising to focus on prevention for your healthcare plan. Tell our listeners about your response to what you saw from Ministre Dubé and his healthcare plan last week and what Quebec Solidaire is proposing.
Yeah. There is a lot to say on that plan, but I think the main problem is that Mr. Dubé and Mr. Legault forgot a very simple principle, and it's prevention. The public health care system in Quebec will never work if we are as sick as we are today collectively. We need to address sickness. We need to address the causes of people getting sick. It's a very simple idea that when you invest in prevention, you actually keep problems from happening. And if our system is jammed, it's because too much people are getting sick. So we are working on a plan to reconstruct our public healthcare system in Quebec. We're not ready to say everything that is in that plan. We are still working on it. But the first pillar of that plan, the first element of our vision will be a massive investment in prevention, because we need to intervene before people get sick. We cannot only treat them when they are already sick.
We're with Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois, co-spokesperson for Quebec Solidaire. Monsieur Nadeau-Dubois, let's talk a little bit of politics now and strategy side. And you mentioned vision, right, just in your last answer. Vision for you, by the way, the goal for you this October, it's to win the election, right? Not opposition or anything like that. You want to win. You want the whole thing.
Well, we always want to win when we are into politics. And I think what we're seeing right now is a government of Francois Legault that is, being pushed to the right of the political spectrum by the rise of the Parti conservateur du Québec and Éric Duhaime. Mm-hmm. And that worries me because we need to be able to address climate change, and we won't be able to do that if we let right-wing political ideas become the mainstream politics in Quebec. We need to be worldwide leaders in terms of fighting climate change, and we won't be able to do that if our politics are being pushed to the right by politicians like Éric Duhaime and such parties.
So I totally hear what you're saying. So let's try and do that right now. Let's try and fix that together. I like to be helpful as well, not just a radio host who's critical. So I'm looking at the polls last little while. Quebec Solidaire, 15, 20%, in that area, that ballpark, right? Yep. So how do you broaden your base? It's some people, I speak to some pollsters, and they say, in fact, that Éric Duhaime is stealing votes from your party as well. Some people that are not happy about health measures and science and that kind of stuff, they're leaving your party and going to Éric Duhaime. So how do you broaden your base?
Well, what the polls are actually, when we look at where the votes from Éric Duhaime come from, what we're actually seeing is that the main voters are going from the Coalition de Québec to Mr. Duhaime. But it's true to say that other parties also have a few voters going to him. Mm-hmm. My answer to your question is that we are building the best and the most credible team to fight back against Francois Legault's agenda. We have announced very strong candidacies in the last weeks. For example, Mélissa Généreux, who is a former director of public health in Eastern Townships. We have recruited Guillaume Clich-Rivard, which is one of the most important immigration lawyer in Quebec, who has been fighting for the rights of immigrants in Quebec for years now against the reforms of Simon-Jolin Barrette. And we also have announced Dr. Isabelle Leblanc, which was up until very recently the head of Médecins Québécois pour un régime public. So we are building the most credible, progressive team to fight back against Francois Legault, and that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that it's a strong message to people that maybe were hesitant in the past, and we're asking the question: is Quebec Solidaire ready for such a task as to govern Quebec? And I think such recruitment from our part are a message that we are building a very solid and credible team.
We spoke about Francois Legault. We even brought up Éric Duhaime. Let's talk about one other party here, and it's the Quebec Liberal Party. And you must be enjoying the chaos they're going through. To see your opponents going through that chaos, you must somewhat enjoy that. Now, listen, when I talk about this to our listeners, it always happens. I get a text message saying, Elias, Liberals, they've lost my vote. I'm thinking about Quebec Solidaire. I'm thinking about Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois. So often they mention your name directly here. What's your message to Anglophones who are now feeling like they don't have a home in the Liberal Party and saying to themselves, can I find a home in Quebec Solidaire?
Well, my question for them is, who do you trust to bring forward a progressive agenda in Quebec? Who has the credibility to say we are going to fight back against the rise of individualism, the rise of exclusionary politics? Who has demonstrated their credibility and their steadiness on those issues, on those values? Who is the most credible team, the most credible party to fight climate change or to push the government for him to fight climate change? I think what we are seeing right now in the Parti libéral du Québec is a party that is disoriented. It's a party that is one week is a nationalist party, the other week it's a Green party, the other week it's a progressive party. But, no political marketing will ever be as efficient as convictions. And I think after 15 years, Quebec Solidaire has become that progressive alternative in Quebec politics. And we are building, like I was saying before, I think the team to really take the next step as a party.
Last question, and speaking of Quebec and divisiveness, I really feel everything that's gone on with Bill 96 has brought English and French fighting to a level that I thought we left behind in the 1990s, and I hate this part of what's going on in Quebec society. There's some division there. What do you say to people that say Bill 96 is actually creating more problems than it's solving?
Well, I think a lot of people actually benefit from that kind of polarization on both sides of that debate, And at Quebec Solidaire, we have someone in that parliamentary commission, Ruba Gazal, who is herself a child of Bill 101, who is from a minority in Quebec, but also loves French and recognizes the importance to protect French in Quebec. And I think a lot of Anglophones agree with that. I don't think the Anglophone community is a monolithical group where everyone hates linguistic laws in Quebec. I think it's a caricature that is being done too often. And I think some radical voices, even inside the Anglophone community, sometimes give that impression. But when I meet young Anglophones on an everyday basis, they don't talk to me about the fact that they hate Bill 101. They talk to me about climate change. They talk to me about their reconciliation with indigenous people. They talk to me about the unbelievable housing crisis we are all facing right now in Quebec,
I totally
whether
agree.
we speak French or English. And on those three issues, who's the most credible party? Who has the most credible team? I think it's Quebec Solidaire.
I agree. The caricature is not accurate on the ground.
Exactly.
Last little thing. Are you going to help out the Liberals to get rid of that Bill 96 amendment on CJEPs? Will you help them out? They want it gone now.
Well, what we're ready to do is to discuss with all parties to make sure there's a delay, to make sure that CJEPs, Anglophone CJEPs, have the time to adapt to that new reality. I, for my part, think it's a good thing that young Francophones learn English. I also think it's a good thing that young Anglophones learn French because it's a key to have more accessibility to jobs in Quebec. It's easier to get a job if you're bilingual in Quebec as an Anglophone. It's easier to get a job if you can master French because you can have a job all across Quebec because you can work in the public sector. And I think it's something that we will help young Anglophones by giving them French courses. But we understand there are application issues. We understand it's important for CJEPs to be able to adapt. So that's why we're ready to discuss an amendment to give a delay to that clause to make sure that everyone is ready for that new curriculum.
Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois is co-spokesperson for Quebec Solidaire. Very generous with your time. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure.